There are nights when silence itself becomes a scream. November 14th, a Thursday. The kind of evening that feels like every other evening in a quiet neighborhood where children play until the streetlights flicker on. But in the Morrison house on Ashwood Lane, something had already begun to rot from the inside. Something no one could see yet. Something that would turn a family into a headline, and then into a warning. The air that night carried the smell of rain that never came. The kind of humidity that clings to your skin and makes you wonder if the sky is holding its breath. Waiting. The Morrison house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, a two-story colonial with white shutters and a porch swing that hadn't moved in years. Paint peeling near the gutters. A lawn kept just neat enough to avoid complaints. From the outside, it looked like any other house where people lived and fought and tried to hold together the fragile thing called family. But houses remember. They absorb the words we scream. They hold the silence after apologies that never come. And this house had been drinking and poison for a very long time. David Morrison was 43, a man who wore his exhaustion like a second skin, an accountant with thinning hair and eyes that had stopped looking at people directly somewhere around his 40th birthday. His wife, Angela, was 39, blonde hair always pulled back too tight. A woman who smiled at neighbors but whose hands shook when she thought no one was watching. And then there was Emma, 16 years old, the daughter who had stopped speaking to her parents in full sentences 6 months earlier. The girl who wore her headphones like armor and whose eyes carried the kind of darkness that comes from seeing too much too young. They had lived in that house for 11 years. 11 years of dinners where silverware scraped plates louder than conversation. 11 years of doors closing quietly but with a violence that rattled frames. 11 years of pretending everything was fine while the foundation cracked beneath them. The first sign came on a Wednesday morning, November 13th, the day before everything shattered. Angela Morrison walked into the kitchen at 6:15 to start the coffee and found the back door wide open. Not just unlocked, open. Swinging slightly in the pre-dawn breeze. The deadbolt still engaged, the chain still attached, but the door open, as if the house itself had exhaled. She told David. He checked the locks, checked the windows, found nothing disturbed, nothing missing. He blamed the wind, blamed a faulty latch. But Angela stood in that kitchen and felt something she couldn't name. A coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. A sense that something had entered their home. Or perhaps that something had been waiting inside all along. Emma said nothing. But that afternoon she came home from school and went straight to her room without a word. Her mother knocked twice. No answer. When Angela finally opened the door, she found Emma sitting on her bed, staring at the wall. Not her phone, not a book. Just the wall. And when she turned to look at her mother, her eyes were red, not from crying, from something else. From the kind of fear that makes your body forget how to produce tears. "What's wrong?" Angela asked. Emma's voice came out flat. Empty. "Someone was in my room." "What do you mean someone was in your room?" "My things are moved. My journal. My laptop. Someone went through my stuff." David dismissed it. "Teenagers," he said. "Always dramatic. Always looking for attention." But Angela went upstairs after dinner and stood in Emma's doorway and looked at the room that had once been decorated with boy band posters and fairy lights. Now the walls were bare except for a single photograph. Emma and her parents. 5 years ago. Before whatever had broken between them had calcified into this permanent winter. The photograph was face down on the dresser. That night, Angela couldn't sleep. She lay beside David and listened to him breathe. Steady. Unconscious. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the door. About Emma's room. About the way her daughter had been disappearing for months. Not physically, not yet. But in the ways that mattered. In the light behind her eyes. In the sound of her laugh. In the space she took up at the dinner table. At 2:37 in the morning, Angela heard it. A sound from downstairs. Not loud. Not violent. Just the soft creak of weight on old floorboards. She sat up, listened. There it was again. Slow. Deliberate. Someone walking through the living room. She shook David awake. He groaned. Told her she was hearing things. But she made him get up. Made him grab the baseball bat from the closet. They crept downstairs together, their hearts hammering against their ribs. The living room was empty. The kitchen untouched. Every door locked. Every window sealed. But in the center of the living room floor, there was something that hadn't been there before. Emma's backpack. Open. Contents spilled across the carpet. Papers, pens, a water bottle, and her journal. Open to a page covered in handwriting that didn't look like hers. Jagged. Frantic. The same phrase written over and over. They don't see me. They don't see me. They don't see me. David's face went pale. Angela's hands started to shake so badly she had to hold onto the banister. They ran upstairs. Emma's door was closed. David knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He opened the door. The bed was empty. The window was open, the screen removed and leaning against the wall. And on the pillow where Emma's head should have been, there was a note. Written in that same jagged handwriting. I'm still here. You just stop looking. The police came at 3:42 in the morning. 2 officers who looked too young to have answers for something this wrong. They searched the neighborhood, knocked on doors, shined flashlights into backyards and under porches. They found nothing. No sign of Emma. No footprints in the dew-damp grass. No witnesses. Just a teenage girl who had vanished through a second-story window without making a sound. The investigation began the way these things always begin. Questions, interviews, suspicions. The police looked at David first. They always look at the father first. They asked about his relationship with Emma, about arguments, about discipline. David sat in that interrogation room and realized he could remember the last time he'd really looked at his daughter. Really seen her. He knew she was angry. He knew she was distant. But when had that started? And why? Angela broke during her second interview. Not because she had done something, but because she realized she hadn't protected her daughter, hadn't noticed when the light went out of her eyes, hadn't asked the right questions, hadn't pushed past the one-word answers and the closed doors. She told the detective about the fights, about David's long hours at work, about the way Emma had started wearing long sleeves in summer, about the guidance counselor who had called 3 times and how Angela had promised to handle it but never did. The detective, a woman named Rivera with gray at her temples and eyes that had seen too many missing children, leaned forward.
Mrs. Morrison, did Emma ever talk about harming herself?
Angela's world tilted. No, she wouldn't. She's just going through something. Teenagers go through things. What things? And Angela realized she didn't know. She didn't know what her daughter was going through. Didn't know her friends, didn't know her fears. Didn't know the last time Emma had smiled and meant it. The search expanded. Emma's phone records, her social media, her school locker. And that's when the story changed. That's when the investigators found the messages. Hundreds of them. From an account with no name, no profile picture. Just a string of numbers. Messages that started 6 months ago. Friendly at first. Understanding. Someone who listened when no one else did. Someone who saw her. Really saw her. And then the messages changed, became darker, more possessive, more demanding. The account told Emma she wasn't safe at home. That her parents were the problem. That she needed to disappear. Needed to become invisible until she was ready to be free. Detective Rivera sat across from Angela and David and showed them printouts of the messages. Their daughter's words, raw, desperate, filled with a pain they had somehow missed. Emma talked about feeling like a ghost in her own house. About parents who looked through her instead of at her. About wanting to disappear so completely that maybe, finally, someone would notice she was gone. David put his head in his hands. Angela stopped breathing. And somewhere in the silence between them, the truth settled like ash. The break came on day 4. A jogger in Riverside Park, 3 miles from the Morrison house, found Emma's shoe near the old maintenance shed. The police descended. Dogs, divers for the creek. Volunteers combing through brush. And in the shed, behind a stack of rotting lumber, they found evidence that someone had been living there. A sleeping bag, granola bar wrappers, and Emma's phone. Dead battery. But they traced the final ping. Emma had been in that shed for less than 24 hours, and then she had moved. The question was where and with whom. The anonymous account was traced to a public library computer. Security footage showed a man in his 30s. Baseball cap pulled low. No clear facial features. He had created the account. Had groomed Emma for months. Had convinced her that running away was the only option. was freedom, but the footage also showed something else. Emma, 3 days before she disappeared, sitting at a computer 2 stations away from him, looking at him, and he was looking back. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone Emma knew, or thought she knew. Detective Rivera pulled every frame of footage from that library, enhanced, cross-referenced, and finally found an angle that caught his face. A man named Thomas Keller. No criminal record. A substitute teacher who had worked at Emma's high school for 6 weeks the previous spring. He had been let go. Quietly. No official reason. But there had been complaints. A female student who said he gave her too much attention. Asked too many personal questions. Nothing provable. Nothing prosecutable. Just enough to make the administration uncomfortable. They found him 2 days later, living in a motel 40 minutes outside the city. In his room, they found a laptop. Dozens of fake accounts. Dozens of girls. All teenagers, all vulnerable. All told they were special. Understood. Seen, but they didn't find Emma. Keller sat in interrogation and smiled. Not the smile of someone caught. The smile of someone who still held all the cards. Detective Rivera didn't raise her voice. Didn't slam her hand on the table. She just looked at him with the kind of exhaustion that comes from seeing evil dress itself up as kindness too many times. Where is she? Safe, Keller said. Safer than she ever was with them. Her parents? If you can call them that. You've seen the messages, you know what that house was like. I saved her. Rivera leaned forward. You isolated her. Manipulated her. Made her think she was worthless so you could be the one who made her feel valuable. That's not saving someone. That's predation. Keller's smile faltered. She wanted to leave. She wanted someone to care, and you took advantage of that. So I'm going to ask you one more time, where is Emma Morrison? He looked at the mirror, at the camera in the corner, and then he laughed. You'll never find her. Not unless she wants to be found. I taught her how to disappear, really disappear. And she's good at it. Better than I expected. The room went cold. It took another week. A week of dead ends and false leads and Angela Morrison losing pieces of herself every single day. A week of David Morrison finally understanding that his absence had consequences. That the daughter he had stopped seeing had learned to make herself invisible. Had perfected it, and then Emma called. Not her parents, not the police. She called a crisis hotline, and the voice on the other end was gentle, patient, didn't pressure, didn't demand, just listened. And Emma, in a voice so small it barely carried through the line, said 4 words. I want to come home. They found her in a youth shelter 2 states away. Thin, exhausted, but alive. She had run from Keller after 2 days. Had realized his promises were cages. Had survived on her own. Scared. Angry. But finally ready to be found. The reunion was not a movie moment. There were no running embraces, no tears of joy. Just a girl looking at her parents like strangers. And parents looking at their daughter like a miracle they didn't deserve. Emma spoke quietly. Told them she didn't know if she could forgive them. Told them she wasn't sure she wanted to come back to that house. To that life. Angela nodded. Cried. Said they would do whatever it took. Said they would listen. Really listen. For the first time in too long, David, his voice breaking, said, We see you now. I swear to God we see you, and Emma looked at him. Really looked at him, and said, Prove it. The Morrison house stands quiet now. Different family, different furniture, different lives. But houses remember. They hold the echoes of the people who lived there, the fights, the silences. The moment a family realized they had been living with a ghost of their own making. Together, separately. They're learning the language they never developed. Learning to see each other, really see. Thomas Keller is serving 15 years. The investigation uncovered 7 other girls. 7 other families who almost lost their daughters to a man who weaponized loneliness. Some of those girls were found. Some are still learning how to be found. And in the Morrison house, in the room that used to be Emma's, the new family's daughter sleeps soundly. She doesn't know the story of the girl who disappeared from that room.